The avoidant didn't leave because they didn't care. They left because your emotions made them lose control of themselves. Have you ever wondered why someone suddenly goes silent just when things are starting to feel real? Why the closer you try to get, the further they pull away? If you're confused, hurt, and left without answers, this video is for you. Today, we'll uncover one of the most painful and hidden defense mechanisms of the avoidant. They withdraw not because you weren't enough, but because you awakened the part of them they've spent their whole life avoiding, their deepest vulnerability. They don't say it, but they're watching. They don't name it, but they're hoping you'll break the silence first. And the biggest paradox, they're waiting for you, but they'll never have the courage to admit it. If you've ever found yourself trapped in the exhausting cycle of proving your worth to someone who keeps retreating, if you want to truly understand the psychology behind their silence, stay until the end. What you'll hear might shift the way you see yourself and what love really means. Hit subscribe, follow this channel, and stay until the end because you deserve a love that stays, not one that always walks away. You may never hear them admit this, but the silence of the avoidant doesn't come from indifference. It's the surface of an emotional storm they don't know how to survive. When an avoidant suddenly pulls away just as things get deeper, most people assume the worst. They don't love me anymore, I'm not enough, or they've replaced me. But that assumption traps you in self-doubt and abandonment. The truth is far more complex. Avoidants don't leave because they don't care. They leave because they feel too much, and that terrifies them. Deep down, they're not numb, they're overwhelmed. But they never learned how to stay with emotion. Many grew up in homes where closeness was unsafe, where asking for love made you weak, where vulnerability invited rejection. So when you come close, with patience, kindness, and emotional presence, they don't feel loved, they feel exposed, seen too clearly, unprotected in the one place they fear the most, true emotional connection. This creates an intense inner war. On one hand, they crave intimacy. On the other, their nervous system screams, danger, retreat, so they pull away. Not because they've lost feelings, but because the connection becomes too real, too raw, too close to their old wounds. It makes them feel like they're losing control, and for an avoidant, that's the scariest thing of all. They retreat not because they don't feel, but because they feel too much. But what you don't see is the chaos behind the withdrawal: confusion, fear, shame, grief, and yes, longing. But instead of expressing, they suppress. Silence becomes their survival. And that's what hurts you most, because you love by showing up, and they love by running away. You come close to connect, they distance to protect. But the paradox is this: you think they've stopped caring, when in fact they're overwhelmed. You think you've been forgotten, when in reality, they're trying to forget themselves. They're running not from you, but from the part of themselves you've awakened. When you send a kind message, they reread it. But they don't reply, not because they don't care, but because they're afraid the emotions will flood back, afraid of losing control again. They don't know how to feel, only how to shut down. And perhaps the most painful truth, they care. They miss you, but their pride, built from fear, is stronger than their desire to reconnect. What looks like strength is just emotional armor. When you stop chasing, they feel the emptiness. But rather than face it, they endure it silently, because to come back would mean facing everything they've avoided for years. That's why you must remember, their withdrawal is not a reflection of your worth, it's a reflection of their unprocessed emotional wounds. So what should you do? Not beg, not prove, but stand still in your emotional dignity. Because real love doesn't come from chasing someone who fears closeness. It comes from two people who are brave enough to stay present even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's imperfect. Before you judge someone for not being able to love you the way you need, pause for a moment and ask, where did they learn how to love? Because no one is born afraid of closeness. Avoidance is not a personality, it's a learned response, shaped over years of subtle emotional wounding. And for many, the lesson was simple: the closer you get, the more it hurts. Avoidants didn't learn love through warmth. They learned emotional connection in environments where softness was a burden. Maybe when they cried as children, they were ignored. When they showed fear, they were told to toughen up. And when they needed comfort, they were told they were overreacting. These moments, however small, etched deep into their nervous systems. programming them with a dangerous belief: if I need someone, I'll get hurt. So they learn to become independent, too early, too fast. They learn to self-soothe, suppress their needs, and build invisible walls to protect themselves. But the cost of that safety was a childhood devoid of true emotional connection. No one taught them that needing support is human. No one mirrored back their feelings as valid. Over time, they began to equate closeness with risk, vulnerability with exposure. As adults, they carry that abandoned inner child into every relationship. On the outside, they might seem composed, successful, self-reliant. But deep inside is a long-standing loneliness. They crave to be understood, but fear being seen. They want someone to stay, but are the first to push them away. Not because they're cold, but because from a very young age, they were taught one silent truth: no one truly stays. The painful truth is this: avoidants don't fear love, they fear being genuinely loved. You didn't show up with drama or demands. You came with patience, with quiet empathy, with a gaze that asked for nothing but offered everything. And that, more than anything, shook their core. They were used to hiding. They'd mastered the art of distance, just enough to keep others from seeing their most vulnerable parts. But then you appeared. You didn't force your way in. You didn't pressure them to open up. But your unconditional kindness made them feel seen in a way they weren't ready for, and that terrified them. When avoidants begin to sense a true emotional bond forming, they don't feel safe. They feel threatened, because for them, emotions aren't familiar ground. They're dangerous territory, where rejection can strike the moment they're exposed. So even if their heart leans toward you, their survival instinct pulls away. Inside, they start to question: if I give too much, will I lose control? If they see the real me, will they still stay? Is this peace even real, or will it disappear like everything else? These questions don't leave their lips, but they echo silently in their mind, paralyzing them. Your softness becomes a mirror, reflecting all the parts of themselves they've buried: the fragility, the insecurity, the longing to be accepted they never dared to voice. And so, the more they feel you're safe, the more unsafe they feel. Not because of you, but because of what they feel around you. You did nothing wrong. You were simply present, and that presence made them feel out of control. This is the heartbreaking paradox of loving an avoidant. The more sincere you are, the more afraid they become. The more kindness you show, the more they retreat. Not because they don't feel love, but because your love is too real, too close, too capable of breaking down the walls they built just to survive. They don't say goodbye. They don't slam the door. They just slowly fade, as if nothing deep ever existed between you. And yet, that kind of quiet disappearance hurts the most because you're left with no clarity, no closure, and no understanding of what went wrong. For the avoidant, withdrawal is not a strategy, it's a reflex. It's not premeditated, it's survival. When emotional closeness starts to feel too intense, their nervous system sends a warning: too close, not safe. And they do the only thing they've ever known to feel secure: create distance. But that distance doesn't come through honest conversations. It begins subtly: slower replies, less initiation, a colder tone, shorter eye contact. No fight, no explanation. Just presence slowly being pulled away like a quiet wave retreating from the shore, leaving you standing there, trying to understand what just happened. To them, it doesn't feel like abandoning you. It feels like escaping something overwhelming. The emotional bond becomes too strong, too real, and they feel engulfed. And to breathe again, to regain a sense of control, they withdraw. They need space, but that space becomes a painful void for you. You don't get a clear answer, not because they don't care, but because even they don't fully understand what's happening inside. All they know is that something feels too much, too fast, too close, and their instinct chooses silence as a shield. But behind that silence isn't indifference. It's quiet panic, a fear they can't name or explain. And ironically, the more you ask, "What's going on?" the more they pull back. Not because they don't want to answer, but because they genuinely don't know how to explain a reaction they themselves don't understand. The quietest and most brutal truth inside an avoidance world is that phase, when they convince themselves silence will bring peace. They tell themselves, saying nothing will make this easier, disappearing will protect me. They believe distance will restore control, that fading out will help them return to the cold, detached, self-contained version of themselves. But what they meet is not relief, it's emptiness. Silence is not peace. Silence is the absence of a connection they once pretended they didn't need. There are nights when they scroll past your name in their contacts, not to text, but to feel some invisible thread that still exists. They don't remember every word you ever said. They don't remember each message, but they remember how you made them feel, the emotional presence, the sense that their heart had a place to land without being judged, the sensation that someone finally understood the things they could never articulate. And that realization unsettles them, because that feeling felt like home, and they were the one who walked out first. They start to wonder, why did I leave? But that question threatens their entire identity, because to answer honestly means admitting they didn't leave because they didn't care. They left because they were afraid of how much they cared. So pride becomes their armor. They stay silent not because they don't miss you, but because they refuse to admit they do. Pride keeps them from facing the quiet whisper inside, I wish I hadn't pulled away. But pride can't fill the void. It only delays the moment they must face the truth that your emotional presence is not replaceable. And they haven't forgotten it. They can't forget it. They're just pretending they're fine. They once believed distance was power, that when they pulled away, you would keep chasing. They got used to you being the one to hold the rhythm of the connection, sending the first message, making peace, proving your feelings. There was a quiet comfort in knowing, no matter how long their silence lasted, you'd still be there. But then one day, you stopped. No more just checking in texts. No more long messages explaining your emotions. No more soft complaints that secretly begged to be seen. No more pursuit, and that unsettled them more than any words ever could. Your silence, the very thing that once made them feel safe now, leaves them disoriented. Because in the avoidance mind, they were always in control. They could appear and disappear on their terms, and you would always wait. But your silence shifted the dynamic, and for the first time, they're faced with a feeling they don't recognize, loss of control. With no reply, no reaction, they begin to feel the imbalance created by the very space they once depended on. They start to wonder, did you give up? Are you forgetting me? Have you found somewhere else to give your heart? These questions echo with no clear answer, and not knowing makes them anxious. What they once thought was strength, silence now turns against them. It no longer works as a measure of your feelings. There's no signal to hold on to, and the false sense of safety that once helped them sleep now becomes a source of restlessness. Ironically, as you learn to let go, they begin to feel the pain they never expected. Not because you did anything wrong, but because your silence has shown them something new. They no longer have control over your heart. When you went silent, they first assumed it was temporary. They believed you'd come back just like before. But day by day, as no signal came from you, the silence began to shift. It was no longer a space for them to feel free. It became a mirror, and in that mirror, for the first time, they had to face themselves. Quietly, without noise, reflection began. Not the impulsive kind of missing you, but a deeper internal collision. Did I just walk away from something truly valuable? That question didn't scream. It whispered, repeatedly, in the quiet moments when the distractions faded, when they were finally alone with their thoughts. In that space you left behind, their old avoidant patterns became clear. The unconscious withdrawal, the emotional shutdown, the instinct to create distance instead of honesty. And when they looked back, they could no longer blame the circumstances, or you, or incompatibility. They had to face their own emotional responsibility. What confused them most was that you weren't angry, you didn't threaten to leave, you didn't do anything wrong. You simply pulled your energy back. And that's what disarmed them, because for the first time, loss didn't come from drama, it came from your quiet awakening. Regret began to creep in, but not in loud, dramatic waves. It was slow, subtle, like a quiet, steady rain. On the outside, they looked composed, but inside, emotions tangled, sadness, doubt, and a growing fear that maybe, this time, you really wouldn't return. And in that silence, something new began, awakening. No more running, no more excuses. Only one question remained, simple but heavy. If that was real love, why did I leave it? Avoidants are skilled at appearing fine, like they don't need anyone, like they're the ones always in control. But behind that mask lies a truth very few get to see. They're not as strong as they seem. When they go silent, when they don't text first, it's not strength, it's fear. A fear so big, it paralyzes them. The fear of rejection. They want you to be the one who speaks first, to break the silence. Not because you should, but because the thought of being ignored, of being told you're too late, of being seen as vulnerable, it terrifies them. To initiate contact means opening themselves up to the very thing they've spent years avoiding, emotional risk. And that feels more dangerous than staying quiet. So they wait, not out of patience, but because they don't know how to face themselves. Inside, the desire for connection is alive, strong, insistent, but trapped behind years of pride. Pride that isn't confidence, but armor built over wounds never fully healed. They open their phone, scroll past your name, hoping to see a sign, a message, a story, anything to prove you're still there. And when they find nothing, they pretend it doesn't matter. They carry on. But everything feels emptier. You used to be the energy that touched a part of them they refused to name. You were the place where they felt seen, understood, even without word. Now, your absence, calm, quiet, without anger, becomes a merciless mirror. One that shows them you're no longer there. Not because you stopped loving, but because you chose to love yourself. And that's when their awakening begins. Your silence teaches them what all your words could not. When you spoke, they withdrew. When you reached out, they doubted. But when you fell silent, they had no more distractions. They had to face what they feared most, being loved, but not knowing how to hold it, losing someone who saw them more deeply than they'd ever allowed. You no longer have to prove your worth. Your absence has already done that quietly, steadily, without explanation. They begin to realize that no one else has ever touched the places in them you did. New connections, if they exist, feel shallow. No one else makes them feel seen. No one stays steady through silence. No one sits with their walls except you. And that realization isn't comforting. It's painful, regretful, heavy. Because now they know the one they pushed away was the only one who accepted them entirely, imperfections and all. That's when their inner world cracks. No more justifications. No more blaming timing or compatibility. Only one truth remains. I lost something real, and I may never get it back. This is the moment when the avoidant faces their biggest paradox. For years, they believed control was protection, independence was strength, guarding the soft parts of themselves was survival. But then, when you're no longer there, the very control they used to be proud of becomes a cold emptiness. There's no one to prove they don't need, no one to shut the door on. And they begin to ask themselves, what exactly have I been protecting, or have I just been imprisoning myself? In the quiet aftermath, they start seeing clearly. What they once called strength was just armored avoidance. And avoidance is no longer a shield, it's evidence of emotional immaturity. And here comes the painful realization, the one that stings the most. The pain they feel now is not caused by anyone else. It is the cost of their own choices to run. This awakening doesn't arrive dramatically. It comes in tiny moments. A quiet night alone in a room too big. A meal eaten without anyone across the table. The unconscious habit of opening your chat window and then closing it. Those moments point to one truth. They lost the one person who understood them without requiring them to explain themselves. They lost themselves in the fear of being loved. And then the most ironic twist hits them. They begin to crave the very thing they once feared. Your love, the patience, the safety, the quiet understanding you offered, no one else brings that. Looking back, they realize you were never the threat. You were the only one who ever saw who they really were beneath the layers of armor. You didn't fall in love with the mask, you loved the person hiding behind it. But the realization comes too late. Now that they want to return, they don't even know if there's still a door they can walk through. The fear of being swallowed by love that once controlled them now becomes the fear that they will never again have access to that love. That fear is suffocating because this time, the loss isn't something that happened to them. It is something they did to themselves. And in the end, after all the silences, the withdrawals, the internal wars they'll never admit out loud, one quiet truth finally rises. The person they pushed away wasn't someone who loved them wrong, but someone who loved the right person at the wrong time. You didn't lose. even if they didn't choose you. Because your silence, your conscious decision to step back, was the greatest gift you could give both of you. Space for them to face themselves, and space for you to return to your inner peace. Not being loved right doesn't mean you're unworthy of love. Sometimes the deepest act of love isn't holding on, it's letting go, when you realize you can't save someone from themselves. Avoidants aren't villains. They are wounded people who haven't yet healed. But you are not responsible for becoming the doctor to their pain, especially if it costs you your own emotional safety. You have loved enough. You have waited long enough. Now is the time to choose yourself, not out of bitterness, but from awakening. If they ever learn anything from your silence, it won't be from the messages you once sent, but from the moment you stop sending them. Because when you stop chasing, you're no longer the one who clings, you become the lesson. A lesson that love cannot be controlled, it must be received with courage. And if they ever return, it won't be because you waited, it will be because you stopped waiting and healed.